Since the earliest civilizations, humans have struggled with how to provide the greatest freedom for the greatest number of people. From ancient Athens to the American Revolution, the French Revolution to the Prague Spring, democracy has proven to accomplish that end. In places such as Egypt, a continuing struggle is creating a responsible government which protects the rights of the entire population. Hosni Mubarak came to power in 1981 and ruled as a military dictator of Egypt for the next 30 years. Under his rule, the emergency law, which had originally been imposed during the Six-Day War, was extended indefinitely and resulted in the extension of police powers, the suspension of constitutional rights, and the legalization of censorship. The standard of living of the average Egyptian during this period declined to the point that 40% of Egyptians were living on less than $2 a day. On January 25, 2011, as the Arab Spring swept across the Middle East, Egyptians took to the streets to protest poverty, unemployment, government corruption, and the rule of Mubarak. They succeeded in overthrowing Mubarak by February 2011 and began the process of electing a legislative body. In June 2012, Mohamed Morsi, a representative of the Muslim Brotherhood, became the first democratically elected president of Egypt. Although Egypt initially felt optimism about a democratic future following the Arab Spring, it has since been unable to sustain a stable government due to its immature political system, its lack of developed national institutions outside of the military, and a civil society that is not conducive to the rule of law. On November 22, 2012, President Morsi issued a declaration giving himself unlimited power to protect the revolution in Egypt, and gave the Islamist-dominated Constituent Assembly free rein in drafting a new constitution. He also did not follow through on his promises to improve the socio-economic problems plaguing Egypt. In June 2013, 1 year after President Morsi was sworn in, protesters once again lined the streets of Egypt. Leftists, secularists, and Christians formed the foundation of the protesters who demanded for Morsi's resignation. Pro-Morsi supporters also took to the streets, which led to violence throughout the country. The military quietly supported the anti-Morsi protesters because under the Morsi government, the military had lost power. Led by General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the military issued an ultimatum on June 30, 2013, stating that Morsi had 48 hours to give in to the protesters' demands before the military intervened. On July 3rd, the military successfully staged a coup and instituted a figurehead as the interim leader while the protests continued. The constitution was also annulled, with a new one passed and in effect as of January 18, 2014. Since the coup, al-Sisi has been the clear favorite in the upcoming elections for president. The coup was successful in part because of public support, and in part because the military is one of the most powerful institutions in Egypt. As the only truly national institution, and the most powerful armed institution, the military is the most influential force in Egyptian politics. It used its power to overthrow Mubarak and Morsi. The military viewed Morsi's moderate Islamic rule as threatening the military as an authoritarian, secularist, nationalistic institution. The military and al-Sisi want to preserve their own economic and political interests. Because it has exclusive access to the armed forces, the military can ignore any laws in place, making it unaccountable. Should an opposing group such as the Muslim Brotherhood, which was portrayed by Mubarak as a radical Islamic terrorist group, come into power, the army has been inclined to remove them, regardless of legitimacy. Other national institutions that could keep the military in check are instead being used by the military to extend its power. The judiciary system, which should be able to grant legitimacy based on the Constitution, has instead used its power to remove the military's opposition. In March 2014, over 500 Muslim Brotherhood members were sentenced to death in a mass trial widely believed to have been politicized. The Islamist-dominated Egyptian parliament, in turn, has very little ability to make change, with all of its decisions being subjected to the scrutiny of other ruling bodies. On June 14, 2014, it was declared invalid by the Supreme Court, and full legislative authority was given to the nation's military rulers. Additionally, the military has targeted students, journalists, and other groups protesting its power in the streets and through the internet. For the May 2014 election, General al-Sisi has run almost entirely unopposed and is expected to win by a wide margin. Part of the reason that Egypt has been unable to develop a strong democracy is because of its political system, which has not been able to develop properly under Mubarak's rule. Being described as a pyramid of mafias, the old regime used widespread police brutality to force the opposition into submission. While in other democracies, formal parties generally have different ideas on how to reach the same greater goal, Egypt's political system contains multiple vague groups with contradictory goals, since under Mubarak's rule they were not allowed to better develop themselves. By the time of elections for Mubarak's successor, the nation was divided into three main socio-political factions, though none are strongly defined, and all have overlaps and links with the others. The first and most powerful faction is the state. Comprised of Mubarak's government, police forces, and other institutions, instead of serving as a natural mediator in politics, it has a vested interest in keeping power due to heavy involvement in businesses and the economy. Historically, the state has had very close ties with the army, but in the overthrow of Mubarak, the army defected and gave its support to the other factions, before rejoining in order to overthrow Morsi. Islamists, led by the Muslim Brotherhood, form the second side of Egypt's triangle of political forces. In general, their main goal is to form an Islamic state through whatever means possible. The Muslim Brotherhood has recently come to view democracy as the best potential path, although they are not averse to consolidating power as Morsi attempted to do during his presidency. After Morsi's outing, they have been greatly weakened, with different Islamist groups splitting and pursuing different courses of action, from continuing to push for an Islamist-dominated democracy to joining up with the state. The last group, and most difficult to define, dubbed civic society by Economist magazine, is essentially made up of everyone else, including religious minorities. Civic society led the forces in opposition of Mubarak and Morsi, with secularists, Christians, and others forming the bulk of the protesters. The diversity of this faction, however, makes it the weakest of the three, being divided in its goals other than to oppose the first two factions. This political triangle is extremely difficult to manage, and ineffective in uniting the people under a single ideal. As a result, even if one group comes to power, the other two can unite and overpower it. At the end of Mubarak's rule, Islamists and civil society joined together to oust him. After his downfall, though, there was no clear compromise between the two groups, and Morsi was elected by the Islamists due to the internal division within civic society. Then, civic society allied with the state to overthrow Morsi in order to prevent the Islamists from gaining too much power. Now, al-Sisi and the army look to stay in power, and whoever they support will be in control. As was seen in the disposement of Mubarak, where Islamists and the rest of civic society came together to overthrow him, and then Morsi, where civic society and the state united against him. Regardless of alliances, though, the army still holds the true power, and whoever the army wishes to support stays in control. With the army in control of the government, Egypt's government has lost sight of its purpose in civil society. Civil society consists of the institutions which communicate the needs of the people to their government, and also assist the government in meeting the people's needs. In Egypt, however, after 30 years of oppression, in which elements of civil society, such as freedom of speech and opposing political parties were repressed, Egypt's civil society is very underdeveloped. Freedom of speech is not a right in Egypt, and media has historically been censored. For example, Egypt is currently imprisoning 4 Al Jazeera journalists, and many more from around the globe have been tried in absentia. The government does not seem to have any plans to change. The presidential frontrunner, al-Sisi, has been quoted in saying, "If you have information on an issue, whisper it in the ear of an official instead of exposing it," and a warning to the press to stay silent. The legacy that Mubarak left of suppressing political oppression also continues. The Muslim Brotherhood, for example, has been outlawed. They are also unable to protest, and in April, 683 members of the Muslim Brotherhood were sentenced to death without trial. Violent protesting also continues to disrupt the dialogue between the people and the government. On May 18th, 4 people were injured in a bomb explosion at a presidential election rally for al-Sisi, and later in the week, 3 policemen were killed at Cairo's Al-Azhar University at a pro-Morsi rally. Egypt's next elections are scheduled for May 26th and 27th, and although al-Sisi believes democracy in Egypt to be at least 20 to 25 years down the road, it is still inevitably coming. Although the Arab Spring may not have created an automatic democracy, the seed has been planted, and if Egypt overcomes its immature political system, its lack of developed national institutions besides the military, and its underdeveloped civil society, Egypt will have a future in liberal democracy.